Hello. This is the latest in my series of Charlton comic artists. This one is devoted to Nicky Zann. Uh, Nicholas Zann was best known as a fine artist. He was a born and raised New Yorker, lived there all his life, and died there in 2020. I'm going to put a link down below to his website, so you can check him out. His fine art, his biography and stuff doesn't mention his stint at Charlton, but he did do a lot of illustrations and stuff, and he had kind of an interesting career. His early stuff was a little bit crude, but by the end of the stories I've got, the earliest one I have is from 1971, and I've got a few from 72, and then one from 75, which shows a lot of improvement. First one is called "Please, Darling," and it's about this girl, Teresa, and she's got her boyfriend, Carl, and they live in this fishing village in New England, but she wants to get out of there and go to New York. So she's like, I'm going to get him to take me to New York. And he's like, well, I'd like to take you, but my father needs help. And she's like, well, I need your help too. So she tells her father she's going to New York, and he's like, well, I guess I can't chain you to your room. And she says, well, Carl's going to drive me to the bus stop. So Carl takes her, and he says, okay, I'm going to drive you to New York. So they get to New York City, and he's like, how do you like the big city? And she's like, oh, look at all the people. After that small town, it looked like something. So he fixed it up so he can stay with his aunt, and he's going to stay somewhere close by. So his Aunt Nora welcomes her and gets her a job. And so within 3 days, she's a working girl in New York. And so she meets this guy in the office, and they're leaving. And she's like, oh, I forgot that Carl was going to be waiting for me. And the guy's like, well, I didn't know you had a guy waiting for you. And he's like, well, we're not married or engaged. If she wants to go out with you, go ahead. So the days go by, and she dates this guy, and they go to clubs, where it's groovy. And so one day soon, he says, she runs into Carl, and she's like, oh, Carl hasn't called me in a while. And so he says, so she runs into him, and he says, I've been waiting for you, Teresa. It's like, Cal, what's wrong? I'm going home. You've had your fun, Teresa. If you want to come home, Aunt Nora, she's pissed at you, and if you don't want to come, she wants you to move out one way or the other. And she's like, leave? Listen, Cal, wait one more day, one more week, and I'll tell my boss. And the guy's like, you don't have to do what he says. He's nothing but mouth. So Kyle goes off on him. Pow! She's like, well, I guess I'm just going to stay here. So she's partying in New York and having a good time, but she keeps thinking about Cal. And, like one day she goes, oh, I haven't heard from him. And then finally got a letter. She's like, and it's like a Dear Teresa letter. He's gonna marry this other girl. And the letter is brief, heartbreaking. Cal is going to marry some other girl. He wanted me to know. The end. Heartbreak. The next Zann story is called The Wildlife, and it's inked by Chuck Alisea. The thing I can say about Zann's art, he's not real flashy, but he has this angular style of drawing people. And so these kids are partying in the woods, and this guy, he's a park ranger, and he says, you know, it's illegal to have forest fire anywhere in California. You're going to be under arrest. So the guy's like, oh, you're not going to arrest us, and they kind of rough him up a little bit. And the girl is like, you know, hey, don't do that. You know, you're stupid. And so she pulls the guy's hair, and the guy gets in. The ranger gets away and flips the other guy, and they jump on their bikes and take off. So the girl is left behind with the ranger. He's like, well, don't worry, I got their license plates. You know, we'll get them. And he's like, you know, you could be in trouble for this too. And she's like, oh, well, yeah, I didn't know those guys. I worked with that girl, and she asked me to come out today. So he says, well, you know, since you stopped me from getting a beating, I guess I'll just take you home. And she's like, is that all you do, is hassle people out in the woods? And he's like, of course not. I'm doing a census on wildlife in the area. So he takes her home, and he's like, well, you know, I wouldn't mind seeing you dancing like that under more pleasant circumstances. She says, oh, you're a peeping Tom, huh? I better go in. But then she says, well, you know, if you really meant what you said, you know, you got my number. And he says, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. So she goes in and tells her folks about what happened. And her father's like, oh, you know, I'm pissed off about it. I should do something to that guy. And says, well, the ranger was nice. It's kind of an interesting play on the panels here. With the mother and father on the left, and then she's in the center between the two panels, and then they're on the right. Looks like there's 4 people on the panel, but really it's just 2 panels. He was known for his diptychs, and that was a style that he did in his art later on. So the ranger comes by the next day, and his dad's having trouble with the lawnmower, so he gives him some advice on fixing it. And they go to the beach and have some fun. And they're like laying on the beach, and she's like, oh, you wouldn't kiss a girl in public. She's like, ha. And she's like, oh, he's wonderful. So he takes her, and they meet these tame deer that he had saved the year before from a forest fire. And things are heating up between them. And boom. I think I found you, darling. I think I found her, darling, and just what I wanted. This next story is When You Got It, Flaunt It. So this girl Claudia, she's kind of insecure, and she's been seeing this guy, but he decides to dump her. It's outside this club, and so she's all upset. And these 2 people, they see her, and they said, oh, you know, we saw that was terrible. Can we help you? And she's like, no, I just need to be alone. So they say, oh, well, yeah, we'll take you home. And so we got to make a stop on the way. So they stop at this coffee house to see the woman's husband. They're, I guess they're brother and sister, and she's married to the guy that owns this coffee shop. So Claudia and this guy Lou are sitting there, and they kind of hit it off. And she's like complaining because she's so tall and skinny and mousy looking and nearsighted. He's like, hey, you know, you're not bad at all. I saw you dancing. You're pretty good. Not everybody, you know, it's nice to be seen with a tall girl. But she's down on herself. And so it turns out that the woman has a gym. And she's like, well, I don't need a gym. I'm skinny as it is. And he says, no, I can teach you other things. So a couple days later, she goes to the gym. And she says, you know, you're a pretty girl, but, you know, your biggest problem is posture. So I'm going to give you some exercises to improve your posture. And then, you know, pretty soon she starts getting more confidence. And Lou is asking for her. And she's like, I can't believe this guy likes me, you know. I don't know. The work is serviceable. It's not really great, but like in this story, this is the only panel that really tells me it's Zann by just, you know, the figure drawings. You can see the backgrounds are just kind of rudimentary here. So he asks her out, and they go to the ball game. And she's like, oh, this is great, you know. My brother was a big baseball fan. She knew more about baseball than he did. So he's like, oh, you're not wearing glasses. And she says, oh, I can see far away. I just need them for reading and stuff like that. So he takes her home, and you have the look of a girl who's about to get kissed. I have, and so they kiss. So the next day she goes to the gym, and she's like, I want to take the long course. I want to get, you know, I want to get looking really great. And she's like, oh, well, you know, you're there. You got the posture. I'm just going to show you some makeup tips. And so she gets her ready for the date and gives her some new glasses. And she's like, there, you know, now you're like a new woman. She comes out, and he's like, wow, you know, you look great. So glad you think so, Lou. I did it all for you. Shush, darling. It's time for love. The end. The next story is called Let the Teardrops Fall. And this came out the same month as that last story, in August of 1972. And you can see his artwork is still very simple. The story is like a big nothing story. He's like, she heard this guy is like a real fast mover, and all the girls tell her to stay away from him. But she's like, oh, well, I'm just not going to be possessive. And the girls keep warning him he's no good, but she like keeps him on. She like keeps him at arm's distance. So finally, you know, after they've been going out and hitting off and on for a couple of years, he wants her to go skiing. So they go skiing. And she's like, well, you know, you go ski, I'll just find a ski instructor that teaches me how to run on these things. So she's like, she's with the instructor, and he's out on the trails. She's like, well, you know, he's on his own at night, but not on his own in the daytime, but at night he's all mine. So finally he's like, you know, you're the greatest. Will you marry me? And she's like, oh, I've been waiting. I've been in love with you since the first day we met. I made up my mind the first day we met. I prayed that you would feel the way I do, and my prayer has been answered. And they live happily ever after. The end. This last story is called My Secret Love. This is a lot. You can see this story is from 1975, and you can see he's come a long way with this comic art. His figure drawings are still kind of elongated and distinctive. She's like, oh, I'm in love with this guy, but he has to be destroyed. So it starts out, she's in school, and she's hanging out with this guy, and he's like, bad news. He's like, let's get out of school, let's go to Malibu. So she jumps on the motorcycle with him, and they take off. And he's like, oh, he's driving too fast. See, he's gotten a lot better drawing cars, too. So a cop starts chasing him, and so he's, he won't be able to follow me up here. So he takes off, up onto the beach, and drives kind of crazy. But he thinks he lost him, and he comes out, and he comes back onto the road, and there's the cop waiting for him. And the cop's like, well, I'm just kidding. It's not like today where they would have, he would have beat him to death or killed him. He's just like, oh, I'm going to write you a ticket. So the guy's all pissed off. He says, if I ever catch you without that badge, fuzz, I'm going to knock you out. And he's like, yeah, well. So then they're at the beach, and you can tell the girl is a good girl because she's always dressed, and all the other girls are really, really being slutty. And so she's like, well, I'm kind of afraid of this guy. I don't really like kissing him, but there's nothing else I can do. And she's like, well, I'm gonna get a ride home with Linda. And she's like, here, take the car. I don't want to. I'm gonna ride home with it on Smoky Sickle. And then he's like, oh, you better not break the speed limit. That creep's waiting for you. She says, don't worry, I'm doing 50. That's the limit. So the next day, this guy shows up at the beach, and they're like, oh, ditch it. We don't know this guy. So he says, hey, I knew so-and-so, and he said to look you up. He gave me your description so I could tell you who you were. And they're like, oh, well, you seem cool. So he starts hanging out with these guys. And he's like, don't you get mad that guy's, is making plays for other girls? And she's like, well, I don't like it, but there's nothing I can really do about it. You want to take a walk on the beach? So they go out and walk on the beach. And she says, I want you to kiss me. And she's like, yeah, that was really good. I don't really like kissing that other guy. So they go back, and he says, I'm gonna make a play for you. And he's like, well, you better be careful. So he makes a play for the guy, and he tries to get his friends to stop him from cutting in, and they're like, hey, he's your chick, it's up to you. So he takes over with the pretty girl. You can see he's gotten a lot more. I don't know whether he inked it himself or he's just got a better inker, but there's a lot more detail in the art in this story. So he's like, well, I got to tell you something. I'm a cop, and we're about to bust this guy's. So he moves in, and they arrest him. And he's like, oh, that girl, she finked on us. So he she pulls a knife on her and starts to make a lunge at her, and the cop just beats him up. And all the girls are like, well, we don't mind that those guys got busted. We didn't know they were selling drugs. And she's like, oh, well, he'll never want to have anything to do with me now. But then he shows up at her house, and she's like, oh, do you really like me? I'm glad, I'm sorry. I'm never going to run with that crowd again. I'm going back to college. Says, I'm glad. And they're like, boom, they're together. Well, that was a taste of Nicholas Zann's Charlton romance comic artwork. Hope you enjoyed these few examples and got something out of it. I wouldn't say he's a great comic artist like Nieto or the other artists that I've done in this series, but he's serviceable and interesting in the fact that he was a fine artist in other genres. So if you like this video, like it. And I'm always happy to hear your comments and like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Thank you.